Yeah, hoping to have a little fun here. I know sometimes talking about policy, that's great and everything, but we need to be able to lighten things up a little bit. And that's really, first of all, if you don't know what the Babylon Bee is, you're probably at the wrong conference, first of all, but we are a Christian news satire publication, and so we bring people the news, but through the lens of satire and absurdity. And it is interesting to talk about serious topics like policy and important things like who's going to be the next president of the United States and all of that, and how the country's currently being run through humor and satire. The difficult thing, of course, isn't coming up with funny jokes, it's trying to come up with funny things that the Democrats haven't already done in real life. In 1911, G.K. Chesterton said that satire has weakened in our epic for several reasons, but chiefly, I think, because the world has become too absurd to be satirized. What hope do we have then in 2024? Every morning I have to get up and read the news headlines and whatever crazy thing is going on, and this presidential candidate has a brain worm, and you're you're like, how do you write something funnier than what you actually read in the news? Sometimes our jokes even come true. We wrote this one, BLM rioters awarded Nobel Peace Prize, and that very year they were actually nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. We wrote this one, study finds anyone still wearing a mask at this point is probably just super ugly. With apologies to anyone who is wearing a mask right now. It's the Freedom Conference. You have the freedom to do that if you want to. But a couple years later, this headline was published in the Daily Wire. People who think themselves unattractive are more likely to keep wearing masks, study says. Here's another one. Government Disinformation Board determines all criticism of Government Disinformation Board to be disinformation. And sure enough, the next day they came out saying that all the attacks on them were misinformation. As much as I'd love to claim that we are prophets, we have the gift of prophecy and we're able to predict the future with our crystal ball, that's not what it is. Satire, by its very nature, is predictive, because what satire does is it points to a worldview or a philosophy or something that's going on in the world, and it just takes it to its logical conclusion. And when your worldview is that of progressivism, that is your entire worldview, is to always push to the next thing, no matter how crazy or absurd it is. Now, of course, that makes their job difficult, trying to stay ahead of the news, but that's not the only thing that makes their job difficult. The other thing that makes our job tough is the kind of pushback that we get from the left, from the mainstream news media, from fact checkers, even from the government. I know that I always forget to leave a pause for laughter there, because I live and breathe in this world, and it's true, our jokes get fact checked. Our jokes get fact checked fairly often. Fact checkers attack us, the left attacks us, and the government, even the government comes after us. Here's a headline, or here's a comment from Brian Stelter of CNN, who called us a fake news site. Which we ultimately decided was a compliment from CNN. This is Donnie O'Sullivan of CNN, who is upset that the Babylon Bee's headline on a big news story got more views and shares than the CNN article on the same topic. And I spoke about the government coming after satire. The person he's quoting is an ex-CIA agent who was calling the Babylon Bee's satire dangerous and harmful misinformation. The New York Times called us far-right misinformation. And they say that we call our jokes satire in scare quotes in order to protect our presence on Facebook and other social media platforms. They say that we traffic in misinformation under the guise of satire. Scary, right? Very scary. And then let me just pause and say, they paint this picture of us like we're these evil guys, smoking cigars in the basement, trying to figure out how to trick grandmas on Facebook, into sharing our articles. We do have the cigars, but other than that, it's completely untrue. We decided to found the Babylon Bee in 2016 because we saw that there was just a complete lack of conservatives, of people on the right, whether that's libertarians, conservatives, Republicans, Christians, using comedy and satire in order to promote truth. And we believe that comedy and satire are tools and gifts from God in order to help us to communicate truth and to mock ridiculous ideas. So we decided to found this site, and honestly, we just wanted to tell jokes. We just wanted to have fun. We wanted to write jokes that jive with our worldview and can speak to an underserved audience. So many conservatives are turned off of Saturday Night Live and late night shows because they don't understand us, right? Because they're not funny anymore, because they're completely taken over by this hostile leftism. And so we decided that we would have our own fun and write our own jokes and found our own little kind of version of The Onion. Well, quickly it got more popular than The Onion, and it took off and became this platform that we were able to use to communicate truth. And I started to see the power of comedy in communication and the way that comedy threatens those in power. Comedy can take down tyrants. Comedy can change the world if we use it right. This kind of pushback that we got from places like the New York Times, we were two guys running a satire site in our garage. I never imagined that the New York Times would be writing hit pieces about us. But it just shows how scared the left is when the right can use comedy in order to push back, in order to fight, in order to expose the ridiculous things that are going on. Here's a fact check. We wrote a joke once when water was discovered on the moon. We said that Trump proposed a space navy that would go up there and, I don't know. And USA Today wrote a 1,000-word fact check on this joke and found it to be false. When Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, we wrote a joke saying that the Ninth Circuit Court had overturned her death. And this was also fact-checked by USA Today. Now, do we have any Monty Python fans in here? We wrote this joke, Senator Hirono demands Amy Coney Barrett be weighed against a duck to see if she is a witch. The younger crowds don't know Monty Python as well as you guys do. No offense. But Facebook removed our post saying that our joke about Senator Hirono incited violence on Senator Hirono. Probably the most absurd one is this one. CNN purchases industrial-sized washing machine to spin the news. This got fact-checked by Snopes, and one of our earliest fact checks from Snopes, and Facebook then threatened to deplatform and demonetize our page because of the CNN washing machine article. Here's some other Babylon Bee headlines that have been fact-checked. Trump, I have done more for Christianity than Jesus. And at the time we told this joke, he hadn't said that yet. So here's another one. California Christians must now register Bibles as assault weapons. Thanks to new laws, VeggieTales finally introduces new cannabis character. fact-checked by Snopes. Ocasio-Cortez appears on The Price is Right, guesses everything is free. This one just got fact-checked. DNC dyes Chicago River red to celebrate abortion. I told my fellow writers, I was like, should I put this one in there? I'm like, I'm putting it in there. So here's another one. Pope Francis says COVID vaccine will now be required to enter heaven. So it just kept hitting me how absurd it was that there was a war on comedy from the establishment. This is a fight not just for comedy, but for free speech as a whole. There's an onslaught against comedy, and we see it everywhere. We see it through cancel culture. You know, Jerry Seinfeld won't even speak at college campuses anymore because everybody's too easily offended, and he gets canceled, and violent threats against him for going to these kinds of places. So at the Babylon Bee, it's bizarre that we have found ourselves kind of accidentally at the forefront of this part of the culture war. We didn't want to. Like, we were guys that wanted to tell jokes, and that should be like the least offensive thing ever, for guys to just tell jokes and put them out there, help lighten the mood, help bring some levity to politics, some levity to everyday life. But we found ourselves thrust into the forefront of this war for free speech, almost entirely by accident. So we wrote this piece. The Babylon Bee's Man of the Year is Rachel Levine. I won't say it's our best joke ever, or our most tasteful joke of all time, but it is a joke that is pointing out a truth. It's pointing out a reality, you know, a biological reality that a man is a man. And we got our Twitter account locked out. We were completely locked out of our Twitter account for posting this joke. What kind of world is it where you can post a joke calling a biological male a man? It's a true statement that nobody disputes seriously. And it's clearly done as a joke, making fun of the media, and we get removed from the public square for this offensive joke. So our account was locked out unless we agreed to delete the tweet. And we had to go through this series of steps, acknowledging that we committed hate speech against Rachel Levine. So we decided that we weren't going to do that, and there was no world in which we were going to go delete our tweet. This is the notice we got from Twitter. Hi, the Babylon Bee, your account has been locked for violating the Twitter rules. Specifically, you have violated our rules against hateful conduct. This is our CEO, Seth, who said, we're not deleting anything. Truth is not hate speech. If the cost of telling the truth is the loss of our Twitter account, so be it. And it started this firestorm and this series of events, these dominoes that started to topple, where other people started taking the same stand. And eventually, Elon Musk ended up purchasing Twitter, spending $44 billion on it to make it a platform for free speech. And the Washington Post reported that when Elon Musk went into Twitter headquarters for the first time, the first thing he said was, "Free the Babylon Bee." Alexander Solzhenitsyn, author of the Gulag Archipelago, said the simple step of a courageous individual is not to take part in the lie. We do not want to take part in the lie of our culture any longer. I think for too long, conservatives have felt like we need to hide in the shadows, we can't speak up. You know, I'm going to lose my job if I speak up, and those are obviously valid concerns, you know, if you're someone who might get fired for speaking up about your beliefs. But you find that when you stand, half the room stands with you, you know, because there are people that will be inspired by your stand and your act of courage. And maybe, just maybe, by being faithful to our beliefs, we can change the world, even in a small way. So free speech is crucial for comedians, and comedians are crucial for society. The role of the comedian is prophetic. The role of the comedian is someone who can point at our rulers and show people how ridiculous they are. Comedy and satire are a funhouse mirror, right? And they exaggerate and distort and help people see how ridiculous certain things are. In the Bible, Elijah is dueling with the prophets of Baal, and he doesn't argue with them or have a debate or anything like that. What he does is he mocks them. He mocks these prophets who had a false cultural belief, and he mocks them. And the Bible says that he says to the prophets, "Cry aloud, for your God is a God. Either he is musing or he is relieving himself, or he is on a journey, or maybe your God's asleep and he must be woken up." Satire speaks to false cultural beliefs by skewering them. This is why comedy is so important. We can mock things that the left wants us to take seriously. Like the left wants us to think that it's okay for a man to beat the tar out of a woman in MMA, and that man gets a gold medal, That man becomes celebrated, and they want us to think that's normal. And the comedian, much like the boy in the story of the emperor's new clothes, stands up and points and says, "No, this is ridiculous. This guy's naked." That's the job of the comedian. Here's some of our jokes that do that kind of thing. Liberty University criticized after unveiling stained glass window depicting Donald Trump. I'll also add, it's important to make fun of your own side. Inspiring, celebrities spell out, "We're all in this together," with their yachts. This was also fact-checked by Snopes. NBA players wear special lace collars to honor Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Biden cuts hole in mask so he can still sniff. People's hair. Sometimes I forget which ones I put in the slideshows. Cracker Jack changed his name to more politically correct Caucasian Jack. So the fight for free speech and the fight for comedy are one and the same. They feed into each other. We need to defend free speech because it allows comedians to point things out. And by the same ticket, comedians are able to point towards these things that help us to continue our fight for freedom and for free speech. Satire and comedy also encourage us. That's another reason that it's important for us to protect our freedoms in this area. How many of us have been depressed by reading the news? I mean, each and every day. There's even a term for it. It's doom scrolling, where you pull out your phone on Twitter or X or whatever it's called now, and you just scroll and scroll and scroll and look through how horrible the news is today. We got an email from a fan of our site who said, "This past year I've been going through a quarter-life crisis." I don't know what that is, but there are a lot of things that I can't control, but I like listening to your podcast and reading your headlines. It gives me a lot of peace, and I love knowing that I'm not alone in the world. You guys get me to lighten up and laugh at myself, and your satire also helps me take more important things more seriously. Here's another email we got. "My husband of 17 years passed away unexpectedly at the age of 41 a year ago. You guys are a lifeline. Now I can keep up with what's going on in the news, but through the lens of humor and absurdity. I can't tell you how hard my 14-year-old son and I would laugh at your headlines, and you have no idea how much we needed something to laugh at. I know you're probably tempted sometimes to wonder if running a satire website really matters. But I can tell you firsthand that you are doing God's work. The world needs someone to make them laugh." So satire has this deflating property where it deflates anxiety and it deflates the stress about the news, because you're scrolling the news and you look and you're like, "Wait, what? Oh, that's the Babylon Bee." Thank God, it's the Babylon Bee and not real. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. It's so hard to tell the difference, we founded a sister site called Not the Bee that publishes real news headlines. But it's important for us to protect the rights of comedians, even comedians we disagree with, in order to speak freely. Comedy helps us to laugh at each other. Comedy unites us in a way. Remember when Saturday Night Live and late night shows like Johnny Carson actually brought America together to laugh at each other? That's the role of comedy in a healthy society. Here's some headlines that do that for us. Okay, take us to a different leader, say aliens. You can read the rest. Bible experts determine Goliath died of COVID-19. LeBron James pulls over to lecture homeless man on white privilege. Motorcyclist who identifies as a bicyclist sets cycling world record. Rumors swirl that Kamala Harris is being influenced by a Russian agent. I know I probably only have a few more minutes here, and then I think we've got a Q&A. But satire and comedy can be transcendent. They can be true and good and beautiful, and I think it's important as conservatives that we don't abandon these areas. Too long we've ceded that ground to the left and said, the left are the ones who do the late night shows and make all the movies, and they're the ones who create culture, and then we're just over here in our little policy centers huddling and talking policy. Well, they're creating culture and influencing culture. And it's really cool when something like the Babylon Bee breaks through and is able to speak to the younger people and show them how ridiculous some of these things that the left believes are, and communicate our beliefs in a way that's winsome, in a way that's approachable. G.K. Chesterton said that humor can get in under the door while seriousness is still fumbling at the handle. And that's a powerful way for us to look at it, that humor can connect with culture. Humor can communicate in a second what it takes. It can take many, many words to communicate seriously. Satirists can remind people of what's truly important. It can mock what's ridiculous, and it can help us to laugh at those things and make them look ridiculous. So, to wrap up, we tell jokes, and the New York Times hates us. And we've been attacked by everybody under the sun, from news outlets, fact checkers, big tech, Facebook, social media, Twitter, and more. We've been called fake news, a dangerous muddier of the waters of truth, when we're just guys who want to communicate our worldview and communicate truth using humor and put some good jokes out in the world that can bring some laughter, even laughter at a conference where you guys are talking about, I don't know, economics or other boring stuff like that, No offense. So let's laugh at a few more headlines here, and then we'll do our Q&A. Texas constructs border wall to keep out unwanted refugees from California. Trump indicted for inciting assassination attempt. Trump promises Vivek an administration position running the White House 7-Eleven. I think this is my last one. Congress members to wear barcodes so lobbyists can scan prices and self-checkout. Thank you, guys.
Oh man, Kyle, thank you. This is so much fun. I was knee slapping over there on some of those jokes. So funny. My first question, I want to start out by asking you, it feels a little bit like, maybe it feels like this to you, but sometimes as conservatives we feel like it's David and Goliath. And I would say in the world of comedy and the arts, you alluded to this, the left seems way ahead. It seems like there's a lot more creative people. And my question for you is, why is that? Is that just because the elites who control the halls of power in our society and culture are liberal, or is there something inherent to being liberal or conservative that drives this?
Leftists tend to be more into the arts because conservatives have jobs. Like, I mean, I'm half joking, but there's truth in the fact that like we go out and like want to do the hard work of building things and influencing things, and we're kind of autistic in a way where we just zoom in on those things and we forget that the whole breadth of the human experience is so much bigger than that, and that art is so powerful to create these things, to create culture and to influence culture. So it's been a problem, and we're a Christian satire site. It's a problem in the Christian world too, because we want to go out and do work and help the needy and feed the poor and all that. And it's like, meanwhile, we're ignoring the fact that you could go make a good Christian movie once in a while. That wouldn't hurt. So that's the kind of divide that I see there, I think.
Okay, I've got a few questions that kind of hint at a similar theme, and I'm going to try to combine these questions into one.
Sure.
I'll just read them all at once, and you can just respond.
Okay.
What's the value of ridicule and joy versus anger and bitterness? And someone asked, how would you respond to those who say that mocking is not befitting of Christians, or is the satire of the Babylon Bee off-putting to a degree that scares people away?
C.S. Lewis wrote a book called The Screwtape Letters, and if you haven't read it, you should read it. And in it, he writes in the voice of a devil, and he commented later in one of his last radio interviews that he hated writing the book, and he would never write another word as in the Screwtape Letters in the voice of a devil, because he said he had to start thinking like a devil in order to write like a devil, And so I think there's a fine line there for the satirist. Like, you want to ridicule the ridiculous, but you don't want to mock the sacred. You don't want to fall into the trap where you're deconstructing everything. And I get to the point where I'm sitting in church writing jokes down, and my wife has to slap my hand and say, no, like, there's some things that it's okay to take a break from writing B headlines about. So I think there's a fine line there, and I think it's a great word of caution to be careful about. I think in response to the second question, like, is it okay for Christians to ridicule? Is it okay for Christians specifically to do satire? Like, there's a huge history. I didn't even go through it all, but I talked about Elijah and the prophets of Baal. And if you think the prophets were always nice, then you haven't read the Bible, And if you think Jesus was always nice, then you haven't read the Bible. Now, you don't want to use that as license and say, well, Jesus was mean to somebody. I get to be mean. Well, he's Jesus, so he gets to do whatever he wants. But, and I'm not saying I'm the prophet Elijah, but it does show us that biblically, satire is a tool that we can use sometimes in order to communicate truth. And there's tons of other examples: C.S. Lewis, G.K. Chesterton, Martin Luther, Catholic theologians that were fighting against Martin Luther. Like, they were all not very nice to each other at times. And I think it's okay for Christians to use that kind of rhetoric that God gave us.
Great. Is there anything that's off limits for comedy?
I don't think there is any topic that is off limits for comedy. We don't use vulgarity. I mean, that's just who we are, and that's just our beliefs, and we don't cross that line into vulgarity. I do think, though, that you need to make sure that your joke communicates the gravity of your topic. So you don't want to tell a lighthearted joke about abortion, right? Like, we did that joke about them dyeing the river red, but it's very laser focused on mocking the Democrats and their love of abortion and how much they've been celebrating it at the conference. So you have to be careful with it. If it can be mistaken for making light of a serious topic, I think that's where you can get into some trouble. At the same time, like, as Christians, like, we're not necessarily going to write a joke that's mocking a core belief of Christianity, right? Like, we're not going to write a joke that the point of which is like, the Bible is a lie or something. But that's just because, like, that's not my belief. And if somebody that's on the other side writes a joke about that to me, I'm not going to get offended by it because I'm secure in my beliefs in those things. So hopefully that kind of answers the question. But yeah, I do think you can write a joke about any topic, but you do have to kind of weigh, like, is it worth writing a joke about this? And you don't want to be too vulgar.
Yeah, a few people are asking about what's your idea creation process, or how do you write a good joke?
Where do you get your ideas?
Where do you get your ideas?
Always the best.
What's your secret sauce?
Yeah, Stephen King, he's a crazy liberal now, but he's a great writer, okay? And he talked about idea generation as like two guys that go into your basement, and each of them brings an idea up, and they come up and they like show them, and then you put them together, and you're like, oh, like dog hat, like thanks. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that, but thanks. A dog wearing a hat, that's funny, I guess. And so there's a little bit of that, like just sitting around waiting for that spark, that lightning, and you kind of know it when you see it. Like I'll just be. My wife tells the story of when our third son was born. She woke me up at 3 a.m. like, I think it's time to go to the hospital. And I jumped up from a dream, and I start writing a headline down, because it had come to me, like there was some joke that had come to me. And it's probably the next morning I was looking at it like, this isn't funny at all. But that's, so a lot of jokes come like that. And then the other side of it is that it's hard work. Like we write probably 400 headline pitches a week, and 30 of them go up on the website. So there's you write a lot of waste when you write comedy. You're iterating. You're taking those two ideas and saying, like, is this anything? That's kind of Seinfeld's line, as he always said, is this anything? That's what you're always asking. Is this something I can use?
And that was a show about nothing.
And that was a show about nothing. Yeah.
So a few people are asking about your name, the Babylon Bee. How'd you come up with that?
When we were starting the Babylon Bee, The Onion was the paper of record. And The Onion had controlled kind of that world of like those tight satirical headlines. And we wanted something that communicated to Christians. And we felt like Babylon was the perfect example that as Christians, a lot of times, no matter what country you're living in exile. Like you're not always in step with the culture as a whole. And so it's kind of dispatches from Babylon, that idea. And then the Bee is the name of a newspaper like Sacramento Bee, and it's got a stinger, which is great for satire.
Someone asked, do you have an all-time favorite joke, or I might say headline?
I've got a lot of jokes that I enjoy going back to. It's a lot of the ones that I've shown here. Like the best ones are the ones that you kind of we come up with so quick after a news story happens, and then we throw them up there, and it's like immediately they're going viral and people are sharing them. So those are the kind of ones that are a lot of fun to work on. There was one we did back when Trump was in office, I think, that said that the Kool-Aid Man came out to oppose Trump because the Kool-Aid Man hates walls, something like that. So thank you for the pity laugh, I appreciate it. But that was one of my, it was, I told the joke wrong. Anti-wall extremist Kool-Aid Man comes out against Trump. That's what it was. Now you can laugh.
All right. Someone asked, who are some of your favorite comics or shows that might provide inspiration for some of your jokes?
Yeah, Jerry Seinfeld I mentioned, and Seinfeld itself, the show. All the Christopher Guest mockumentaries are a great example of great satire. And what's great about the Christopher Guest mockumentaries, This is Spinal Tap, A Mighty Wind, Waiting for Guffman, those ones. What's great about those is when you watch them, you can tell that the satirist is making fun of that subculture, whether it's heavy metal or folk music or whatever. He's making fun of those subcultures, but you can tell that he also loves those subcultures. And that's what makes satire good, is like having a respect or adoration or understanding of your subject. And so I really like those. Monty Python, as previously mentioned.
Okay, I was going to ask you, what is it that has made some of the late-night comedy in our country less funny over the years? Because sometimes I'll see some reruns from SNL from a long time ago, and I'm like, that's funny. And then SNL, more recently, I would say, it's just not that fun. It's not landing the same way. So would you sort of say that that's the inverse answer, that they don't have an understanding of what they're mocking? Or how would you diagnose their comedy problem?
Yeah, it's partly that. Like someone on the left that writes a joke about Trump, they can't do it. They're physically incapable of writing a funny joke about Trump because they think he's Hitler, and you can't tell a funny joke about Hitler. Like that's, he's gonna end the world, so why would you write a joke making him look silly or something like that? Like to them, they became these prophets instead of comedians. They became full of themselves. But the fuller answer, I think, is that those who are kind of like in like a cult-like religious structure can't take jokes. because you can't break yourself out of that way of thinking. That's not allowed, is to think outside the cult structure of the cult belief system. And the left is a religious cult now. They tell their people these things that are clearly not true, and you have to believe those things or you're not part of that group anymore. Like that men can become women and all this stuff that they want us to believe. So, and then the other part of that answer is basically comedy exposes truth. Comedy shines a light on truth. And when your whole worldview is built on lies, you're going to shrink back from comedy when that light comes shining on you.
What do you think about Dave Chappelle? Because he's someone who strikes me as a comedian who, I wouldn't say he's conservative, but he's transgressive. And so for that reason, he's in the same category as the Bee. But what do you think about him?
Yeah, I really respect what guys like Chappelle are doing. Ricky Gervais is another one. These guys, like Bill Burr is another one even. Like these guys that are probably not conservatives by any stretch of the imagination, and are actually firmly liberals when you look at the definition of liberal from 5 years ago.
Right. Recently.
Yeah, and that's basically what it is that they didn't move on. The left left them in a lot of ways, and they just kept doing their thing, and now they're these pariahs. But I really respect people on the left because there's not very many of them. There's not very many prominent ones who break away from the groupthink and are willing to criticize the fringes of that movement.
We've got so many questions, sometimes it's hard for me to choose among them. But I'll ask a question. Someone asked you about The Onion. They said, do you read The Onion regularly? Did its style influence you early on? And what mistakes might they have made, other than being on the left, that you tried to avoid?
Yeah, we avoided the mistake of being liberals. Yeah, I was a big fan of The Onion growing up, and it felt so cool and edgy and subversive to read this satirical newspaper. I had the paper-bound versions of the Onion newspapers. And the Onion was the inspiration for founding the Babylon Bee. When Adam Ford launched the Babylon Bee in 2016, he saw an Onion headline that was on a Supreme Court case. I think it was the gay marriage Supreme Court case, and it was making conservatives look like the extreme villains in this scenario. And I think it was something like, I think the headline was something like, conservative Supreme Court justices suddenly realize they're going to be the villains in a movie someday. And it's like, that's a good joke. That's a great, I know nobody laughed, but that's a great joke that I happen to disagree with, right? That I think I completely disagree with the worldview. But wow, how powerful is that joke, It's like, I wish I believed what they believed because then I could laugh at this joke, And so that
and enjoy the movie someday.
And enjoy the movie, yes.
They may make that movie someday.
And so that was kind of the inspiration, that we wanted something like that on our side. And I still check out The Onion, and obviously they still have some good jokes on occasion. And but it has kind of fully gone to the left now, where it's much harder for them to tell funny jokes.
Yeah. Someone in our audience asks, why does the Bee choose not to mark its articles as parody in the headlines?
Well, that would just kill the whole joke. Yeah, that would kill the whole joke. You don't that's the whole thing of the way that our headlines are formatted. It's not trying to trick anybody, but it is that you're parodying the format of a news headline. So the whole thing is that you're scrolling Facebook and you glance at it and then you double take on it and go, wait, what? And then you scroll back up and go, oh, it's the Babylon Bee. And that's why it's funny. It's not funny if you say, this is a joke, and then you write your headline. And then after it's like, this was a joke. You can't do that because parody has to retain the format of that which it is parodying, and you kind of break that fourth wall if you explain it. But I understand the concern about people getting fooled or whatever.
Right. Well, I'll share a story that maybe is a little embarrassing for me. But before the Babylon Bee existed, when there was just the beginning of the hand-wringing about fake news, so to speak, I saw some of my Facebook friends sharing a story over and over again. This will date the story, but it was about Paul Ryan, who I believe was Speaker of the House at the time. And the story was about taking away certain benefits in the welfare state or something. But it was a completely fabricated story from start to finish. They had quotes from Paul Ryan in the story. And I was reading it thinking, I'm pretty well informed and tuned into this stuff. I've never heard of that bill. I don't know that bill number. I looked into it and I was like, this is just completely made up. But it was so poorly done, it was hard to recognize as satire. And so do you have any concern? I'm sure the critics of the Bee probably say, well, this is what you guys are doing. But how would you respond to critics who say that it's hard for people to tell the difference and people need more hand-holding and help deciphering what's satire and what's not?
Well, it's true there's a lot of dumb people out there, but I'm not speaking of you,
Well,
but no, but it's happened to all of us, right? Like all of us have seen a story and started to like, wait, what? And you share it or something, and then you're like, oh shoot, I got to delete that.
Yeah.
Sometimes I get fooled by the Babylon Bee. I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I feel like that's something that's not an indictment on the satirist. Like if I'm writing satire of the DNC and I'm saying that they thought that or that they dyed the river red to celebrate abortion, and a bunch of people thought that was true. Isn't that more of an indictment on Democrats that it's believable that they would do that than it is of the comedian who writes the joke about it? So yeah, are there concerns about misinformation, fake news? Yeah, like maybe, but I don't think it's this massive, grave threat that somebody thought that there was a cannabis character on VeggieTales. Like that's not gonna crumble our society. There are, of course, and it sounds like maybe the one you were talking about, the Paul Ryan story you were talking about. There are sites out there that are just like fake news. Like they just write a fake story and there's no point to it. It's not satirical. Like
maybe they're not even American. Maybe they're
exactly. But maybe they're they actually go and try to
fool people.
Trick people, and so there's a fine line there. But yeah.
Ultimately, more speech is probably the answer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So a few more questions. People want to know what you think about things. They want to know who do you think is the least funny public figure?
The least funny of all public
figures
that in the world. I don't know. I mean, I don't know who's the least. I think Trump is the most funny. Like, if I can answer the opposite question. And one reason that we got so popular is that when we were the leftists, the left late night comedy hosts, couldn't make fun of Trump. And it's like, how can you not find something funny about Trump? He's hilarious. And the problem was that they were taking it so seriously. And so for us to be able to tell jokes that kind of play with his naturally funny, character. Yeah, there's something there. So,
people want to know, what do you think about Bill Maher?
Bill Maher's that's another name I could have listed in those people that are kind of comedians or comedy adjacent, and he just stayed the same. and liberals kept going further, progressives kept going further and further left, and he's like, I'm a liberal, and they're like, no, you're not, you're a far-right Republican. And he's like, I believe the same thing I've always believed, and he's another guy that actually has talked about the Babylon Bee on his show and said, we deserve to tell jokes. Like, we have the right to tell jokes, even though maybe he doesn't think they're funny. Like, I think he told his audience, like, this Babylon Bee joke isn't funny. Like, these guys aren't funny at all. But they should have the right to tell the joke. And I appreciate that, right? So he's another guy that's one of those kind of classical liberals. I don't know if classical liberals are a term, but liberal from 5 years ago. That's now a classical liberal.
An old school liberal.
Liberal classic.
What are some topics that conservatives might benefit from taking less seriously and finding humor in?
I mean, every news item that I see, everything in the world, every news item that I see come across the newsfeed is something that's this. We have a tendency to treat it like it's the end of the world, every time there's some news item that everybody's arguing about. And one thing that's been instructive for me is to go back and look at Babylon Bee articles that I wrote a year ago. And I'm like, I don't even remember what this joke was about. Like, what happened, And we were all treating it like, this is the end of the nation, society is falling apart, it's all over. Not that we don't need to fight, not that we don't need to stand up, of course we do. And it's important to fight that fight and to pick our hills to die on. But not everything that CNN and Fox News put up as the thing to yell about for the next 24 hours is really worth getting that worked up about. And so the 24/7 news cycle, I guess, is probably the thing that I would say we need to take less seriously.
Great. Well, I think we can end there, and I'm so thankful to be a part of Steamboat Institute, which is an organization that doesn't do doomsday, doesn't do despair, and for that reason we'll always be fans of the Babylon Bee. So thank you, Kyle.